The Valori High Council chamber had never felt so cold. Chancellor Sarath stood at the center of the great room, her silver scales catching the dim light of the emergency lamps. Around her sat the representatives of 7 species, the proud Valori hegemony that had stood united for 3,000 years. Now they sat in silence, watching the holographic display above them show the death of everything they had built. The Kreth Dominion fleet moved across the star map like a spreading disease. Red markers showed where their warships had already passed. Behind those markers lay nothing but ash and silence. 47 colonies, 18 billion souls, gone in less than a standard month. The outer defense stations have fallen, Admiral Koth reported. The old warrior's voice was steady, but Sarath could see the tremor in his hands. Our remaining fleet has pulled back to Sanctuary Prime. We have perhaps 300 vessels still capable of combat operations. And the Kreth? Asked Representative Yulin of the Marathi delegation. His insectoid eyes reflected the terrible red glow of the enemy fleet. 4,000 warships, perhaps more. They are no longer hiding their numbers. The chamber erupted in frightened whispers. 4,000 against 300. Everyone in the room could do that math. Sarath raised her hand for silence. We sent distress signals to every known species in the quadrant. Have any responded? Her communications officer, a young Valori named Thresh, stepped forward. His data tablet trembled in his grip. Chancellor, I have received responses from 17 civilizations. Hope flickered in the chamber. 17 allies could turn the tide. 17 fleets might be enough. Read them, Sarath commanded. Thresh swallowed hard. The Meridian Collective sends their deepest condolences. Their fleet is committed to border defense against other threats. They cannot spare ships at this time. The hope in the room dimmed slightly. The unified worlds of Keth expressed sympathy for our situation. However, engaging the Kreth Dominion would put their own territories at risk. They must prioritize their citizens' safety. The whispers grew louder. The sovereign states of Ulana regret to inform us that their military doctrine does not permit intervention in external conflicts. They offer thoughts and prayers for our survival. Sarath felt her heart sink with each word. Thoughts and prayers from a species that had begged for Valori assistance just 50 years ago. When pirates threatened their trade routes, the hegemony had sent 20 warships without hesitation. Thresh continued reading. The responses blurred together. Too far, too dangerous. Not our concern. We value our relationship with the hegemony, but the risk is simply too great. Regrets and condolences. Hopes for a peaceful resolution. By the 12th refusal, Sarath stopped listening. She looked around the council chamber at the faces of her people and their allies. She saw fear. She saw despair. She saw the slow realization that they would die alone. Chancellor, Thresh said, his voice suddenly uncertain. There's one more response. Read it. I cannot understand it fully. The signal came from Quarantine Zone 7. The chamber went absolutely silent. Even the fearful whispers stopped. Quarantine Zone 7 was not a place anyone discussed. It was a region of space that the galaxy had decided to forget. 3,000 years ago, something terrible had happened there. The details had been lost to time, but the warnings remained. Do not enter. Do not communicate. Do not investigate. Ships that went in did not come out. That is impossible, Admiral Koth said. Nothing lives in Quarantine Zone 7. The signal is real, Admiral. I have verified it 17 times. Thresh's hands shook as he pulled up the message on the main display. It was short, just 3 words and a set of coordinates. We are coming. This is a trick, Representative Yulin said quickly. The Kreth are trying to confuse us. Perhaps lure our remaining ships away from the planet. The signal did not come from Kreth space. Thresh replied. It originated deep within the quarantine zone. And Admiral, our long-range sensors have detected movement. Koth moved to the sensor station, his military training overriding his fear. He studied the readings for a long moment. When he looked up, his face had gone pale. Ships, 12 of them, moving at speeds our fastest vessels cannot match. They will arrive in 6 hours. What kind of ships? Sarath asked. Unknown configuration. Our database has no record of their design. Koth paused, studying the readings more closely. They are not large. smaller than our heavy cruisers. But the energy signatures, what about them? They should not be possible. The power output from those 12 vessels exceeds our entire remaining fleet combined. The council chamber buzzed with confused and frightened voices. Sarath stared at the sensor data, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. 12 small ships with impossible power, coming from a zone of space that had swallowed every expedition sent to explore it. She thought of the Kreth fleet bearing down on her world. 4,000 warships crewed by soldiers who knew nothing of mercy. In 3 days, they would reach Sanctuary Prime. In 4 days, the Valori hegemony would cease to exist. Whatever was coming from Quarantine Zone 7, it could not possibly be worse than what was already on its way. Do not fire on these vessels, she ordered. Let them approach. The 6 hours of waiting were the longest of Sarath's life. She remained in the command center, watching the sensors as the 12 unknown ships drew closer. Around her, officers and technicians worked in tense silence. Everyone knew that the Kreth vanguard would arrive soon, a forward force sent to probe their defenses. Before the main fleet struck, Chancellor and Ensign called out, "The unknown vessels are entering visual range." The main display flickered, and then Sarath saw them. The 12 ships moved in a loose formation, not the rigid patterns that military doctrine demanded. They were smaller than she had expected, perhaps the size of Valori frigates. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, and as the image sharpened, Sarath felt her breath catch in her throat. The ships were covered in scars, not just battle-damage scars, the marks of weapons that had torn into their armor again and again over what must have been centuries. She could see where hull plating had been melted and reformed, where entire sections had been replaced with materials that did not match the original design. These vessels had been wounded 1,000 times and had simply refused to die. "By the old gods," Admiral Koth whispered. "What are those marks on the lead ship?" The sensors zoomed in. Along the bow of the largest vessel, someone had carved symbols directly into the armor. They were primitive, almost tribal kill marks, Sarath realized. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each one representing an enemy destroyed. "They have not responded to any hailing frequency," Thresh reported. "I have tried every known language and communication protocol. Keep trying." They waited another hour, then another. The 12 ships took up position between the Valori defense stations, orienting themselves toward the direction of the Kreth approach. They moved with the casual confidence of predators settling into hunting positions. Then, finally, the communications array crackled to life. "Point us at the enemy." The voice was strange flat, almost mechanical, speaking in a language that the translation system struggled to process. But the meaning was clear enough. "Unknown vessels," Sarath replied carefully. "We are grateful for your response to our distress call. Please identify yourselves. What species are you? What do you want in exchange for your assistance?" There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. "We are humans. What we want is to see the enemy burn. Now point us at them or get out of our way." Before Sarath could respond, the sensor alarms began screaming. "Kreth signatures," Admiral Koth shouted. "The vanguard is arriving early. 60 warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel." The display showed the Kreth formation materializing at the edge of the system. 60 heavy cruisers, each one more than twice the size of the human vessels. Their weapons systems were already powering up. Sarath opened her mouth to issue orders, to coordinate her remaining fleet with these strange newcomers. But the human ships were already moving. All 12 vessels broke formation and accelerated toward the Kreth vanguard. They did not wait for support. They did not request tactical information. They simply attacked. 12 ships charging toward 60, like they saw nothing unusual in those odds. "What are they doing?" Representative Yulin demanded. "They will be slaughtered." Admiral Koth leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the sensor display. "Watch." The first human ship reached weapons range. It fired once, a single concentrated burst of energy that punched clean through a Kreth cruiser's shields and detonated its reactor core. The cruiser exploded, taking a nearby vessel with it. 2 kills in one shot. The other human ships opened fire. They moved through the Kreth formation like nothing Sarath had ever seen. They did not fly in patterns or follow established tactics. They simply killed, weaving between enemy vessels, absorbing hits that should have destroyed them, and returning fire with devastating precision. The Kreth formation began to collapse. Cruisers tried to retreat, but the humans pursued them with relentless fury. In 12 minutes, the battle was over. 43 Kreth ships drifted as expanding clouds of debris. The remaining 17 fled at maximum speed, their distress signals echoing across the system. The 12 human The shuttle carrying Chancellor Sarath approached the human flagship, with all the caution of a small animal approaching a sleeping predator. She had insisted on making this visit herself, despite the protests of her advisors. If she was going to trust her people's survival to these strange warriors, she needed to look them in the eye. The human ship had no name painted on its hull, only those countless kill marks carved into the metal. Up close, the vessel looked even more damaged than it had on the sensors. Sarath could see where entire sections of armor had been torn away and welded back together with materials that clearly came from a dozen different sources. Patches of alien hull plating covered wounds in the original structure, like skin grafts on a burn victim. This ship had been dying for centuries. Its crew had simply refused to let it. The docking port opened, and Sarath stepped into the human vessel. The air inside was cold and thin, barely within the range that Valori could tolerate. The corridors were narrow, the lighting dim. Everything about the environment spoke of conservation. Every resource stretched to its absolute limit. A figure waited for her at the end of the corridor. The human was tall for her species, with dark skin and short-cropped gray hair. She wore armor that matched her ship's guard, patched and clearly ancient. A weapon hung at her hip, some kind of projectile launcher that looked like it had been rebuilt many times. Her eyes were what caught Sarath's attention most. They were brown and utterly calm, the eyes of someone who had long ago run out of things to be afraid of. "Chancellor," the human said. Her voice was the same flat tone from the communications. "I am Commander Elena Vance. Welcome aboard the Defiant." "Commander Vance." Sarath hesitated, unsure how to express the storm of emotions she felt. "You saved us. The Kreth Vanguard would have destroyed our remaining defenses. I do not know how to thank you. Don't thank us yet. That was just the appetizer." Vance turned and began walking deeper into the ship. "Follow me. You have questions. I can see them burning behind your eyes." Sarath hurried to keep pace with the commander's long strides. They passed through sections of the ship where crew members worked at various stations. Sarath had expected to see many humans, but what she found was different. The crew was mixed, some humans, yes, but also beings of species she had never seen before. A tall, thin creature with crystalline skin was repairing a power conduit. A four-armed being that resembled a gray-skinned insect was calibrating weapon systems. A massive figure covered in thick fur and scales monitored what looked like life support controls. "Your crew," Sarath said carefully. "They are not all human, no. They are survivors like us. We found them drifting in the dark, or fighting alone against impossible odds, or dying on worlds that everyone else had forgotten. We gave them a choice: join us or go their own way. Most chose to stay." Vance glanced back at the Chancellor. "Out here, in the black, species does not matter. Only survival." They entered what Sarath assumed was the command center. It was small and cramped, filled with consoles that looked like they had been assembled from the parts of 100 different civilizations. Star charts covered the walls, marked with countless notes and symbols that Sarath could not read. Vance gestured for the Chancellor to sit. Sarath lowered herself onto a bench that was clearly not designed for Valori bodies. "You want to know who we are," Vance said. It was not a question. "Yes, your species is not in any of our databases. Our records show nothing in Quarantine Zone 7 except death and danger. How are you here? Where did you come from?" Vance was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "We came from a world called Earth, blue and green, mostly water, with a yellow sun. It was beautiful. I never saw it myself. I was born on a ship, but I have seen recordings. My great-great-grandmother was among the last to leave. What happened to it? Our sun was dying. Our scientists discovered it too late to do anything except run. We had maybe 20 years to evacuate an entire planet. 8 billion people." Vance's jaw tightened. "We saved less than 50 million. Those who had ships, those who could build them fast enough, those lucky enough to find a place on board. Everyone else, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. We sent distress signals, of course, begged for help from anyone who might be listening. We had just begun exploring the stars. We knew there were other species out there. We thought surely someone would come. Someone would help us save our people. Sarath felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. She knew how this story ended. No one came, Vance said simply. No one answered. We later learned that several civilizations had received our signals. They debated whether to respond. In the end, they decided the risk was too great. A dying star system, a desperate species, too many complications. Better to let nature take its course. The commander stood and walked to one of the star charts on the wall. Her fingers traced a path through the marked systems. So we ran. A fleet of anything that could fly: military ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels. 50 million refugees looking for a new home. And the galaxy showed us exactly how welcome we were. She tapped a system marked with a red X. The Karate Empire. They saw our refugee fleet as an invasion force and opened fire without warning. We lost 11 ships before we could retreat. Another red X, the Helix Confederation. They offered us sanctuary on one of their mining worlds. Then they tried to enslave us as workers. We had to fight our way out. More markers, more red. Raiders, warlords, species that wanted to study us like laboratory animals. Automated defense systems left over from wars that ended before your hegemony was born. Ancient things sleeping in the dark that woke up hungry when we passed through their space. Sarath counted the red marks. There were hundreds of them. Every time we thought we had found safety, something tried to kill us, Vance continued. Every time we stopped running, we had to start fighting. After a while, we stopped trying to find a home. We just kept moving, kept fighting, kept surviving. For centuries, for 117 years, 3 months, and 12 days since the last ship left Earth orbit. Vance turned to face the Chancellor. We do not count in generations anymore. We count in battles, in enemies destroyed. And how many of us are still breathing? Sarath thought of the kill marks carved into the ship's hull. Thousands of them. She began to understand. The others on your ships, she said. The other species. They are like you, remnants, lost souls, refugees from civilizations that were destroyed or abandoned or simply forgot them. We found the crystalline drifting in a ship, with failing life support, the last survivors of a stellar empire that had collapsed into civil war. The Vekker were slaves who had escaped their masters and were being hunted across 3 systems. The Urson, she nodded toward the massive furred creature Sarath had seen earlier. Their world was burned by raiders 100 years before we found them. 6 of them left. Just 6 out of billions, and you took them in. We remember what it felt like to be alone, to call for help and hear nothing but silence. Vance's voice hardened. We swore an oath, those of us who remained. We would be what no one was for us. When someone calls for help, we answer. When someone faces impossible odds alone, we stand with them. When the galaxy abandons the weak, we remember that we were once weak too. Sarath felt tears forming in her eyes. She had sent her distress calls expecting nothing. She had begged 17 civilizations for help and received nothing but empty words and cowardly excuses. And these humans, these scattered, battered, forgotten survivors had crossed half the galaxy to fight for strangers. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You have nothing to gain from helping us. We cannot even pay you for your losses. Vance smiled for the first time. It was a hard smile, but there was warmth in it. Because kindness should not be a transaction. Because mercy should not be calculated. Because once, a very long time ago, we were the ones screaming into the void while our world burned. No one came for us. So we became the ones who come. She placed a hand on Sarath's shoulder. 4,000 Kreth warships are heading for your world. 17 species told you to pray and die quietly. We will not. We never do. A chime sounded from one of the consoles. The crew member monitoring it, a being with 6 limbs and a face covered in sensor organs, spoke. In a clicking language. Vance nodded. The Kreth main fleet will arrive in 47 hours. We should begin preparing. Sarath stood, her heart still heavy with emotion. "Commander, you have 12 ships. Even after what I saw today, how can 12 ships stop for 1,000? Vance walked to the door of the command center and opened it. Beyond, Sarath could see the corridor filling with crew members moving to battle stations. Humans and aliens working side by side, their movements efficient and calm. They had done this before. They had done it many times. "We have survived everything the galaxy has thrown at us," Vance said. "Empires, monsters, ancient weapons, the death of our sun. The Kreth are just another enemy. They have numbers. They have territory. They have the arrogance of conquerors who have never truly been challenged." She turned back to Sarath, and her smile became something sharper, something dangerous. "We have nothing left to lose, no home to protect, no future to preserve. All we have is each other and the will to keep fighting until our hearts stop beating." Yod's war room aboard the Defiant had become the center of all military planning. For the defense of Sanctuary Prime, Valori officers worked alongside human commanders, sharing data and coordinating their remaining forces. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. Admiral Koth studied the holographic display showing the approaching Kreth fleet. 4,000 warships ranged in a standard conquest formation, heavy cruisers in the center, lighter attack vessels on the flanks, supply ships protected in the rear. It was the same pattern the Kreth had used to destroy every civilization that had stood against them. "They will arrive in 18 hours, Koth said. "Our 300 ships against their 4,000. Even with your vessels, the odds are meaningless," Commander Vance interrupted. She stood at the edge of the display, her arms crossed over her chest. "We stopped counting odds 2 centuries ago. They only make you hesitate. With respect, Commander, mathematics does not care about courage. They outnumber us more than 10 to 1. Vance smiled, that sharp, dangerous smile that Koth was beginning to recognize. "Then we will have to kill more than 10 of them for every one of us they destroy." It would not be the first time a young human officer approached with a data pad. He was barely more than a boy, Koth thought, but he moved with the same quiet confidence as the rest of the human crew. These people grew up fast. "Commander, the crystalline scouts have completed their survey of the asteroid belt," the officer reported. "The mineral composition is as predicted. We can use the larger bodies for the cascade maneuver." "Good. Begin positioning charges. I want everything ready in 6 hours. Vance turned to Koth. "Admiral, we will need your mining ships to assist." "Mining ships?" Koth was confused. "What does mining have to do with combat?" "Everything. The Kreth will expect a direct engagement. Your fleet meeting theirs in open space. They have the numbers for that kind of fight. We do not." Vance pulled up a new display showing the sanctuary system in detail. "So we will not give them the battle they expect. We will make them fight on ground of our choosing." She began marking positions on the display. "Your defense stations here, here, and here. They have limited mobility but strong firepower. The Kreth will try to destroy them first to eliminate your fixed positions." "That is standard tactical doctrine," Koth agreed. "Standard doctrine assumes your enemy is fighting to survive. We are not." Vance marked the human ship positions. "When the Kreth move against your stations, we will strike their flanks. They will turn to engage us. We are too small and too fast. They will not be able to pin us down. While they chase us, your stations will continue firing into their formations. They will eventually realize they need to ignore you and focus on the stations." "Yes, that is when we stop running." Vance's expression grew cold. "That is when we start ramming." Koth felt his blood chill. "Ramming? You mean deliberate collisions? Our ships are old. Our crews are tired. Some of us are ready to rest." Vance's voice carried no emotion, as if she was discussing the weather rather than suicide attacks. "When a ship takes critical damage, when there is no hope of repair, the crew evacuates and the ship makes one final attack. A Defiant-class vessel at full acceleration can punch through 3 Kreth cruisers before the reactor goes critical. We have done the calculations. That is madness. It is efficiency. 1 dying ship destroys 3 enemy vessels. The math is actually in our favor." Koth stared at the human commander. He had been a soldier for 40 years. He had fought in 3 wars, commanded fleets in desperate battles, watched friends die in the cold of space. But he had never met anyone who spoke about self-destructs with such calm acceptance. You truly are not afraid to die, he said quietly. Vance met his gaze. We have been dying for centuries, Admiral. What the Kreth do not understand, what no one seems to understand, is that we are already ghosts. Earth burned. Our civilization ended. Everyone we were supposed to be died with our sun. She looked around the war room at her mixed crew, humans and crystalline and Vecker and Urson, all working together in grim determination. What is left is something else. Something that will not stop. Something that cannot be intimidated or threatened or scared into submission. You can only kill us, and we have become very good at making that extremely expensive. Chancellor Sarath entered the war room, accompanied by several of her council members. The Valori leadership had spent the past day debating whether to accept the human battle plan. The debates had been fierce. Many still wanted to negotiate with the Kreth, to offer surrender in exchange for survival. Commander Vance, Sarath said, her voice formal. The High Council has reached a decision. We will commit our remaining forces to your defensive plan. But I must ask you something first. Ask, why do you fight for strangers? Your people have suffered so much. You have every reason to care only for yourselves. Why risk what remains of your species for people you have never met? Vance was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than anyone had heard before. Let me tell you about my grandmother. Her name was Maria. She was 17 years old when Earth began its evacuation. Her family could only afford one ticket on a passenger liner, one seat for people. Her parents put her on that ship and stayed behind with her younger brother. She never saw them again. The war room had gone silent. Even the humming machinery seemed to quiet. Maria spent 60 years living with that guilt. The guilt of surviving when others did not. The knowledge that her life came at the cost of her family's death. She raised 3 children on a ship that was falling apart. She buried 2 of them before she died herself. And every night, she would tell stories about Earth, about blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched forever, about a world that had died so that she might live. Vance walked to a viewport that showed the stars beyond. Before she passed, she made me promise something. She said that the universe had shown humanity its cruelty. It had killed our world and taught us that we were alone. But she said that cruelty did not have to define us. We could choose to be different. We could choose to be kind. She turned back to face the Valori leadership. So I made her that promise. I promised that whenever I heard someone crying for help, I would answer. Whenever I found someone dying alone, I would stand with them. I would be the rescue ship that never came for Earth. I would be the ally that no one was for us. Sarath felt tears streaming down her face. Around her, other council members were similarly affected. That is why we fight, Vance concluded. Not because we have hope. Not because we think we will survive. We fight because it is the right thing to do. We fight because someone has to. We fight because the dead of Earth are watching. And we will not shame their memory by becoming the monsters that the galaxy expected us to be. Admiral Koth stepped forward and did something he had never done for any foreign commander. He raised his forearms in the traditional Valori salute of deepest respect. Commander Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I have served the hegemony for 40 years. I have fought beside many warriors from many species, but I have never met anyone I would be more honored to fight alongside than you and your people. Vance returned the salute as best she could with only 2 arms. Then let us make the Kreth regret ever hearing the name human. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of activity. Ships moved into position. Weapons were charged. Charges were placed in the asteroid belt. Evacuation shuttles were prepared for crews that knew they might need them soon. On the Defiant, Commander Vance stood on the bridge and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, the Kreth fleet was approaching. Somewhere out there, 4,000 enemies were preparing to kill everything she had sworn to protect. Behind her, her crew worked with quiet efficiency. Humans and aliens, survivors and refugees, ghosts of 100 dead civilizations. They did not speak of fear. They did not speak of death. They had made their peace with both long ago. Commander, the sensor officer reported, the Kreth fleet is entering long-range detection. They will be in weapons range in 3 hours. Vance nodded slowly. Sound battle stations. All ships, final preparations. Throughout the human fleet, alarms began to wail. But they were not the panicked sounds of a species facing destruction. They were the steady, rhythmic calls of warriors preparing for another fight in an endless war. The largest battle in Valori history was about to begin. 300 aging ships and 12 battered survivors against 4,000 conquerors. By every logical calculation, it should be a massacre. But the humans had stopped believing in logic long ago. They believed in will. They believed in sacrifice. They believed in the simple, stubborn refusal to die quietly. Commander Elena Vance sat in her command chair and allowed herself one moment of peace. She thought of her grandmother Maria, 17 years old and crying on a refugee ship as her world burned behind her. She thought of the promise she had made and the wars she had fought to keep it. Then the moment passed, and she was a warrior again. "All hands," she said, her voice carrying through every speaker on every human ship. The enemy approached. The Kreth fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like a swarm of locusts, descending upon a field of grain. 4,000 warships spread across space in a formation designed to overwhelm and terrify. Their commander, High Warlord Krethen the Conqueror, sat on his throne aboard the flagship and smiled at the pathetic defense force arrayed against him. 300 vessels, his tactical officer reported. Most are Valori cruisers and frigates. They have deployed around their defense stations in a standard protective formation. And the unknown ships, the ones that destroyed our vanguard? 12 contacts, Warlord. Small vessels. They have positioned themselves between our fleet and the enemy stations. Krethen laughed a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through his bridge. 12 ships. The survivors of his vanguard had fled screaming about impossible weapons and unstoppable warriors. But looking at the sensor data, Krethen saw only 12 small targets waiting to die. "Destroy the stations first," he ordered. "The small ships are a distraction. Once the stations fall, the Valori fleet will scatter." 800 Kreth cruisers broke formation and accelerated toward the 3 Valori defense stations. Their weapons powered up, filling space with the glow of charging particle beams. It was a classic opening move: eliminate the fixed defenses, then hunt down the mobile forces at leisure. The 12 human ships did not move. The Kreth advanced, growing bolder with each passing moment. Their targets remained stationary, unmoving, as if frozen by fear. Some of the younger Kreth officers began laughing at their communication stations, mocking the enemy's apparent cowardice. Then the humans attacked. It was not a conventional assault. There were no battle lines, no coordinated volleys, no attempt to match the Kreth formation. Instead, the 12 ships simply scattered and began killing. The Defiant cut through the heart of the Kreth assault force, its weapons firing continuously. Each shot found its target with impossible accuracy. Shields meant nothing. The human weapons punched through them like they were made of paper. The Defiant did not fly so much as dance, weaving between return fire that should have destroyed it a dozen times over. Around it, the other human ships were performing the same deadly ballet. The crystalline crewed vessel used its unique technology to become nearly invisible, appearing behind Kreth ships and destroying their engines before they knew they were being hunted. The Urson heavy fighter absorbed punishment that should have reduced it to atoms, its thick armor and redundant systems keeping it alive through sheer stubbornness. "They are inside our formation," the Kreth tactical officer shouted. "They are Warlord. We have lost 40 ships. Destroy them." Krethen roared. "All weapons, fire at will." The Kreth fleet opened fire with everything they had. Space became a storm of energy beams, missiles, and projectiles. The volume of fire was staggering. Nothing could survive such an onslaught. But the humans were not trying to survive. They were trying to kill as many enemies as possible before they died. The Valori defense stations began their own attack, pouring fire into the distracted Kreth assault force. Caught between the stations and the humans, the 800 cruisers found themselves in a crossfire they had never anticipated. Ships exploded. Formation discipline collapsed. Officers screamed contradictory orders. Commander Vance watched her tactical display with cold satisfaction. The plan was working. The Kreth were reacting exactly as predicted, focusing on the human ships, trying to swat the annoying insects that were causing so much damage. Every ship that chased the humans was a ship not firing on the stations. "Casualties?" she asked. "The Wanderer has lost primary weapons." The Exodus is venting atmosphere from decks 3 through 7. No ships destroyed yet. Yet, that word hung in the air like a promise. High Warlord Crethan stared at his display in growing fury. His assault force had been reduced by a third, and they had not even damaged the enemy stations. Those 12 impossible ships were still out there, still fighting, still killing his warriors. Fall back, he ordered. Assault force, disengage and reform. The surviving Kreth cruisers began pulling back, trying to create distance from the human vessels. But the humans did not let them go. They pursued with relentless aggression, picking off damaged ships, preventing any organized retreat. Warlord, the tactical officer said, his voice trembling, the unknown vessels. They are not fighting like any species we have encountered. They take damage that would cripple our ships and continue attacking. They show no regard for their own survival. Then they are fools. Send in the main fleet. All ships, advance. This was the moment Vance had been waiting for and dreading. The Kreth main fleet began moving forward. 3,000 warships accelerating toward Sanctuary Prime. The trap was closing. All human ships, she transmitted, begin cascade maneuver. The 12 vessels broke off their pursuit and raced toward the asteroid belt. The Kreth pursuit force followed eagerly, seeing an opportunity to corner their enemies. They did not notice the tiny charges attached to the largest asteroids until it was too late. The explosions were not large, they did not need to be. They simply nudged the asteroids, changing their trajectories just enough. A cascade began, rocks colliding with rocks, creating a wave of debris that swept through the Kreth pursuit force. It was not enough to destroy the ships, but it slowed them. It confused them. It gave the human vessels time to reform and prepare for the next phase. Kreth main fleet in weapons range into minutes, the sensor officer reported. Vance looked around her bridge. Her crew was battered and exhausted. They had been fighting for hours without rest. Some of them were wounded. All of them knew what was coming. This is it, she said quietly. Everything we have. Everything we are. Leave nothing behind. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. The Valori fleet engaged the Kreth main force head-on, their 300 ships forming a defensive wall around the planet. They fought with courage and skill, but they were outnumbered 10-1, and the mathematics was brutal. Valori ships began dying first one by one, then in groups, their lights winking out like candles in a storm. The human vessels threw themselves into the chaos. They fought like demons, like ghosts, like the survivors of 1,000 battles, who had nothing left to lose. The Defiant led the charge, absorbing damage that would have destroyed any normal ship, its weapons never stopping their deadly rhythm. But even ghosts can only fight so long. Commander, the damage control officer reported, we have lost primary and secondary shields. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Reactor containment is failing. Vance nodded slowly. The Defiant had carried her for 30 years. It had been her home, her weapon, her purpose. Now it was dying. Prepare for evacuation, she ordered. All crew to escape pods. Navigation, plot an intercept course for the Kreth flagship. Her crew did not hesitate. They had known this moment might come. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had made peace with death long ago. The Defiant accelerated, abandoning all attempts at defense. Escape pods launched from its sides as it built speed, aiming directly at High Warlord Crethan's massive command vessel. The Kreth saw what was coming. They concentrated their fire on the charging human ship, stripping away armor, destroying weapon systems, killing the engines one by one. But the Defiant kept coming. Momentum was its final weapon. Warlord. Impact in 30 seconds. The enemy vessel is... The Defiant struck the Kreth flagship at a velocity that turned both vessels into superheated plasma. The explosion was visible from Sanctuary Prime's surface, a brief new star. That marked the death of a tyrant and the ship that killed him. But the battle was not over. The Kreth fleet had lost its commander, its coordination shattered by the sudden destruction of its flagship. But they still had numbers. They still had weapons. They were still killing Valori ships. Admiral Koth watched from his command vessel as more of his fleet died. The human ships were still fighting those that remained, but they were down to 4 vessels now, for against over 2,000. The math was impossible. Admiral, his sensor officer shouted. New contacts, multiple signatures emerging from faster-than-light travel. Koth felt his heart stop. Kreth reinforcements. It had to be. The universe was not fair enough to send help when it was needed. Then the signatures resolved on his display, and he felt something he had not experienced since he was a young officer facing his first battle. He felt hope. Dozens of ships, then hundreds. Ships of designs he had never seen, angular and organic and crystalline and mechanical. Ships that bore the same scars as the human vessels, the same patched armor, the same ancient weapons. Ships from 100 different civilizations, 100 different species, all bearing the same markings. The mark of the survivors. A transmission cut through all frequencies, broadcast on every channel. The voice was human, but different from Commander Vance, older, tired, determined. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Survivor Fleet. We received the distress signal. We are answering. All human vessels, all allied forces, the cavalry has arrived." The new fleet slammed into the Kreth formation from behind. 300 fresh ships crewed by species that had learned to fight the same way the humans had, with no fear of death, no hope of retreat, no mercy for those who preyed upon the weak. The Kreth, already reeling from the loss of their commander, found themselves trapped between. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with the silence of broken enemies. Where 4,000 Kreth warships had entered the sanctuary system, fewer than 300 remained, and those were fleeing as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. They had come as conquerors. They left as survivors, and they would carry the memory of this defeat for generations. Commander Elena Vance floated in the cold of space, strapped into an escape pod with 7 other crew members from the Defiant. Through the small viewport, she could see the debris field where her ship had died and where it had taken the Kreth flagship. With it, a rescue shuttle approached, bearing the markings of the survivor fleet. It was a patchwork vessel like all the others, built from the bones of a dozen civilizations. The pilot who pulled Vance aboard was a young human woman with bright red hair and eyes that were far too old for her face. "Commander Vance?" the pilot asked. "Admiral Chen sends his respects. He wants you on the Bridge of the Remembrance as soon as possible." "The Remembrance?" Vance allowed herself a small smile. "Marcus always did love dramatic names," the pilot laughed. "He says you taught him that." Admiral Marcus Chen was waiting when Vance arrived on the flagship's bridge. He was older than her by perhaps 15 years, with a weathered face and silver hair that had once been black. They had served together decades ago, when they were both young and the survivor fleet was still finding its purpose. "Elena," he clasped her hand firmly. "I thought I lost you when the Defiant went up. The Defiant lost itself. I just happened to be somewhere else at the time." She looked around the bridge at the mixed crew, humans and a dozen other species. She recognized from the fleet's long history. "I did not expect to see you so soon. The message said you were 3 weeks away. We received the distress call and pushed the engines beyond their limits. Lost 2 ships to drive failures on the way." Chen's voice held no regret. "We knew what we were coming into. Everyone volunteered anyway. Everyone always does." They stood together at the main viewport, watching the cleanup operations below. Valori ships were rescuing survivors from destroyed vessels, both friendly and enemy. The Kreth prisoners would be treated well. The hegemony believed in mercy, even for those who had shown none. "The Kreth dominion is broken," Chen said. "Not just their fleet, their reputation. Word will spread. Every species that thought about attacking their neighbors, about conquering the weak, about preying on those who cannot fight back, they will think twice now." "For a while," Vance agreed. "Then someone else will rise. Someone always does, and we will be there to stop them." It was not a boast. It was simply a statement of fact. The survivor fleet had been fighting for centuries. They would continue fighting until there was no one left who needed their help, or until the last of them died. Whichever came first. A message arrived from the planet below. Chancellor Sarath was requesting the presence of the human commanders at a formal ceremony. The Valori High Council wished to honor their saviors. Vance sighed. "I hate ceremonies, I know, but these people need to see us. They need to understand what just happened." Chen placed a hand on her shoulder. "For 3,000 years, the galaxy has believed that survival means looking out for yourself, that helping others is weakness. That the strong take and the weak die. We just proved them wrong, did we? A few thousand Valori are still alive because of us. But Earth is still dead. Billions of our people are still gone. The Crystalline Empire is still a memory. The Ursan homeworld is still ash. We save the ones we can, Marcus. But we cannot save everyone. No, we cannot. Chen turned to face her directly. But we try anyway. And that is what makes us different. That is what makes us human. The ceremony was held in the great plaza of Sanctuary Prime's capital city. Millions of Valori watched from the streets and the windows of towering buildings. Millions more watched through broadcast screens across the remaining hegemony worlds. Chancellor Sarath stood at a podium decorated with the banners of the 7-member species. Behind her, the surviving leaders of the Valori military waited with medals and honors that had not been awarded in generations. But it was not the medals that mattered. It was the speech. Citizens of the hegemony, Sarath began, her voice carried across the planet by countless speakers. 3 days ago, we faced extinction. The Kreth Dominion came to destroy us, and we called to the galaxy for help. Our allies refused us. Our friends abandoned us. We prepared to die alone. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But we did not die, and we were not alone. From the darkness of space, from a region we had quarantined and forgotten, came 12 ships. Just 12 vessels, crewed by a species we had never heard of, fighting alongside survivors of civilizations we thought were long dead. They answered our call when no one else would. On a platform to the side of the podium, the human commanders stood in a loose group. Vance had refused to wear anything formal. She was still in her battered combat armor, the same armor she had worn on the Defiant. Chen and the others had followed her example. They were warriors, not diplomats. They would be honored as what they were. These humans, Sarath continued, lost their world for centuries ago. They sent distress calls just as we did. They begged for help just as we did. And just as our allies abandoned us, the galaxy abandoned them. They watched their planet die while no one came to save them. Her voice grew stronger, filled with emotion she did not try to hide. They had every reason to become bitter. They had every justification for turning inward, for protecting only themselves, for treating the galaxy with the same cruelty it had shown them. But they did not. Instead, they made a choice. They chose to be what no one was for them. They chose to answer calls for help. They chose to fight for strangers. Sarath turned to look at the human delegation. Tears were streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Today, we stand alive because people who owed us nothing risked everything for us. Today, we are free because survivors who had lost everything still found it in themselves to give. We owe these humans a debt we can never repay. She stepped down from the podium and walked across the platform to stand before Commander Vance. The crowd fell silent, millions of beings holding their breath. Commander Elena Vance, Sarath said formally, on behalf of the Valori hegemony and its 7-member species, I offer you whatever you desire. Territory, resources, citizenship, alliance, name what you wish, and it is yours. Vance looked at the Chancellor for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. We do not want territory, she said. We learned long ago that homes can be taken. We do not want resources. We have enough to survive, and survival is all we need. We do not want citizenship. We are citizens of the void, and the void is the only home we have left. Then what can we offer you? Vance turned to look at the crowd, at the millions of faces watching her. She thought of Earth, burning behind her grandmother's refugee ship. She thought of all the species she had saved, all the battles she had fought, all the ghosts who traveled with her. Remember us, she said simply. Remember that when no one else came, we did. Remember that kindness is not weakness, and that mercy is not defeat. Remember that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, there are survivors who will answer when you call. She looked back at Sarath. And when someone else sends a distress signal when another species faces extinction and begs the galaxy for help, remember what your allies did for you. Remember how the Meridian Collective offered condolences. Remember how the unified worlds expressed sympathy. Remember how 17 civilizations told you to die quietly. Her voice hardened. And then make a different choice. Answer the call. Send your ships. Be the allies that no one was for us. That is all we ask. Be better than the galaxy has been. The plaza was silent. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It started as a low murmur, then grew into a roar, millions of Valori voices crying out in agreement. In shame, in determination. They had been saved by strangers who owed them nothing. They would not let that sacrifice be wasted. Chancellor Sarath bowed her head in acceptance. We will remember, Commander, and we will be better. 3 days later, the survivor fleet departed Sanctuary Prime. Their ships were repaired as best as the Valori shipyards could manage, their supplies restocked, their wounded tended. They left behind for vessels to damage to travel gifts to the hegemony, along with the knowledge of how to build more. Commander Vance stood on the bridge of her new flagship, a vessel the crew had already named Defiant II. Through the viewport, she could see the blue-green sphere of Sanctuary Prime falling away behind them. Course, Commander? The navigation officer asked. Vance pulled up the communications log. A dozen distress signals were blinking, messages from species scattered across the quadrant. Some were under attack. Some were facing natural disasters. Some were simply lost and alone, crying out for anyone who might hear. Pick one, she said. It does not matter which. Someone needs help. The fleet accelerated into the darkness. 12 scarred vessels carrying the last light of a dead world. Behind them, the Valori watched them go and remembered the lesson they had learned. Kindness was not weakness. Mercy was not defeat.